A couple of months ago, Francis asked me if I'd be willing to do another sermon. And I was like, yeah, of course. I'm an adrenaline junkie. I love this stuff. I love being scared. And nothing scares me like this. And I was like, all right, I've been thinking since my last one. I got some topics I want to do. And he was like, I want you to preach on something specific. And I was like, oh no. What'd you pick? I thought he'd pick something touchy-feely, experiential, something way outside of my comfort zone. And he's like, I want you to preach on the selflessness of Jesus. I was like, can I say no now? A lot of people think of every once in a while. Our kids have started asking questions, why does God do this? Why does God do this? Why does God do this? Why does this happen? Why does that happen? Where did God come from? And I think we all have these questions at some point in our lives. I think a lot of the time we train ourselves not to think about it. Because we get told so often that, we'll never know, or God's too big to think about. I think that's a failing. I think it's good to think about these things. Not to think that we have answers, but to at least acknowledge that we have questions. Because the more you dig into it, the bigger you realize God is, and the more you realize that you'll never understand it. But that journey of figuring it out is well worth it. So, we're going to start with what would it be like to be God? And along the way, we're going to try to answer or touch on some other questions. And these aren't answers, these are like ideas I've come up with that seem to fit things I've read in the Bible and things I've thought about and things I think the Holy Spirit is sharing with me. So another one is, how can God know everything and be everywhere? Lewis this morning talked about the omnipotence of God, the omniscience of God, and the omnipresence of God. And a lot of time we're just handed that as a basket and go, this is God. And no one ever unpacks it and says, well, what does this mean? And how does this happen? And what are the implications of that? How can God have a relationship with everybody individually? If we believe in a God of relationships, how does he have time for me, as well as you, and the other 7 billion people in this world? How does God decide who goes to heaven? If you have a lifetime of sin and you change your mind at the last second, does that equal going to heaven or not? How is that fair? Or the vice versa. What if you have an entire life of you're following God and you change your mind at the end? How does he make decisions like that? And then a couple about Jesus specifically. Why did Jesus not know that when the world was going to end? He said only the Father knows. Well, how is that possible if he's God? And why did Jesus say he couldn't do anything by himself, but only through the Father? So these are some of the questions that pop up in my head, just randomly. These are the things that keep me awake at night. I said in my last sermon, I have some weird hobbies, and this is kind of one of mine, trying to figure out the nature of God, the nature of angels, where do they exist, what is heaven, how many heavens are there, things like that. I decided not to tackle all of those at once, because or else we'd be here till tonight. And I haven't got answers for a lot of them yet. Okay, so I'm sure everybody here has read this verse, right? It's the one verse we give to new Christians especially, right? Everybody is told, well, read John. That explains kind of everything. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So who is this talking about? Jesus. Good. So let's go to the beginning. I found these paintings and they're just too colorful not to use. So this is day 6 of creation, animals and mankind. But we're going to go before that. Before the birds, before the fish, before the sun and the moon and the stars, before the plants, before the land was separated, before the water was separated, and finally we arrive at day 1. The separation of light from darkness. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And we're all taught that is the very beginning. That's where everything started. But I want to take one more step backwards. So this is the starting point of the universe. Nothing exists. The universe is blank. It's paused. Nothing moves, not an atom, not an electron, not a photon, not a neutrino, because they don't exist yet. Now if you can, we're going to take one more step back. And this is the part where people have trouble. So if we take one more step back from this, where are we? We're nowhere. This is nothing. The universe is no longer paused because the universe itself doesn't exist. Time is not paused because time doesn't exist. There's only now, eternity. The concept of where and when have not been created. There's only God. We rarely discuss what happened pre-creation because people don't want to think about it. It makes our heads hurt, but we have support in the Bible to tell us that God pre-exists the world and even time itself. I hope this is big enough for everybody to read. Colossians 1:17, and he is before all things, and by him all things exist. 1 Corinthians 2 verse 7, but we speak of the wisdom of God in a mystery, even the hidden wisdom, which God ordained before the world unto our glory. Now the problem with translations is they try to pick the kind of the closest English word. And if you look at the Greek, there's the Greek. I love looking at Bible verses this way because you can kind of pull out some additional meaning out of these things. And it's interesting, the word they use for world up there is, we would translate to eons. And eons is not a measurement of space. This is a measurement of time. It's not saying before the world began there was God. It's before the eons, before time existed, there was God. 2 Timothy, who has saved us and called us with all holy calling, not according to his works, but according to his own purpose and grace, which is given us in Christ Jesus before the world began. Same thing here, but this time we're dealing with a word called chronon. The root word is chronos, all right? We got this word, chronology, chronometer. It's all a measurement of time. So this is, again, Jesus Christ before the time began. Titus 1 verse 2. Same thing again. We've got chronos, and they translate it to world. But this happens all over the Bible. That it keeps telling us, God did this before even time began. And that's a hard concept for us to grasp because we constantly live in a world that experiences time. And we only experience time in one direction, and for the most part at one speed. So, we're going to try to experience this idea of nothing. I'm going to try to get people to wrap their head around it because it takes an exercise to try to figure this out. So we're going to start baby steps. We've got a blank room. And there's nothing in the room. It's empty. But this is not nothing because we still have a room. So let's take the ceiling away. Maybe. Come on. There we go. And the walls. Is this nothing? No, we got a floor still. Sorry. Okay, is this nothing? No, because you're probably still thinking this is an empty space. And spaces can be filled. And even if you're not thinking of this as an empty space, you're probably thinking there's air in this and everything. So take all the air out, all the particles, all the radio waves, Wi-Fi signals, everything. This is empty. There's no sound, there's no light, there's nothing. And we still have the problem that we're trying to fill it with something because our mind sees a space and wants to fill it. But nothing is not even space. The possibility of filling it doesn't exist because there is nothing to be filled. This is not an empty room. This is not an empty box. There is no box. And this is where God exists, in nothingness. He has a concept of creation in his mind and nothing else. And now it's time to get to work. So, what do we need before we start any project, after we have a plan? Okay, before materials. We need a place to work. Right? Platform. Good word. Okay, I said workbench. Well, whatever. So you need a workbench. Or if you're Gary, you need a prototyping board. For our masons or construction people, you need a foundation. Farmers need a plot of land. Painters need a canvas. Okay. Or a piece of paper if you're a writer. And sometimes you even need a computer. Computer doesn't want to come up. See, there's a problem. You need somewhere to be creative, a space to work within. And this is one of the primary attributes of God that we're called to worship. But first, we're going to take a little break and do a side trip. Have you ever wondered who created God? Or where did God come from? Annika asked this week, when was God born? And trying to explain an eternal being to a 5-year-old is a challenge. It's almost harder than writing a sermon. So, one of the ways people use to discuss this is called the cosmological argument. And it's a logical proof to explain the necessity of a creator. It's basically this. Every finite and contingent being has a cause. A causal loop cannot exist. A causal chain cannot be of infinite length. And therefore, a first cause or something that is not an effect must exist. Now, this is a little esoteric for most people. So, a lot of people simplify it to whatever begins to exist has a cause. And the universe began to exist, therefore the universe had a cause. Everybody got this? Okay. So, for example, we're going to pick on Gary, because Gary's in my roots group, not my youth group. I have too many groups. Gary creates circuits, and I'm told he's quite good at it. All right. It works. But Gary doesn't create out of nothing. He starts with a prototyping board, which I showed you earlier, or something like that, I'm assuming, right?
It starts up here.
It starts up here. I mean, when you start to, do stuff, you can't solder up here. I wouldn't suggest it anyways. And that's kind of his workbench. That's where he puts things on. But somebody else made the prototyping board. It was probably designed by a person and created by a machine. And someone designed the machine and built that. And probably someone designed it on a computer, which was made by more people. And it goes on seemingly indefinitely until we get to what must be a first cause. Atheists will try to use this as proof that there can't be a God because he would have to have a cause. Something must come before him. But they missed a contingency that the item in question, God, must have a beginning to have a cause. And having a beginning requires time. And since God pre-exists time, he doesn't need a beginning. And by definition, he can't have a beginning. And thus, he can't have a cause. So he must be the first cause. So that's kind of our return argument. So, back to space-time. God needed somewhere to work. Remember, at this point, we don't have a universe. There isn't even an empty space to be filled. There's nothing. So before God starts filling the universe with stuff, he must create a workbench for the universe to be made on. Euclidean space perceptions, which is what most of us are aware of, even if we don't know what it's called, dictates a 3+1 dimensional model. And to simplify this, we call them length, width, height, and time. That's what we know and breathe and love every day. We can walk left and right, forward and back, up and down, and we can only travel through time in one direction. Alternatively, string theory predicts 11 full dimensions, which is way too much for anybody to think about in a single sermon. I tried to think of a way to explain 11-dimensional theory, and I gave up. It takes way too long. But I wanted to show you some examples. This is just 4 dimensions. This is a tetrahedron drawn in 4 dimensions, drawn onto a 2D surface, so that makes it even harder. But if you try to watch the lines, they're really kind of hard to follow. It's kind of like an M.C. Escher painting. Things don't make sense anymore. This is a cube in 4 dimensions. It's called a hypercube. And things can move now in an extra dimension than we're used to. So it plays tricks with our minds because we're constantly trying to make sense of this object. And it exists in a world that doesn't make sense to us. And then you get really weird objects like this thing, which just looks cool. I don't know what this is called, but I wanted to put it in there, so I did. We have trouble understanding things outside of our 3+1 dimensional construct, but interesting things occur when you start adding new dimensions. With the addition of just a single dimension, space can fold, it can twist. teleportation becomes possible, wormholes, time travel, vast majority of the stuff that those of us who watch Star Trek saw on the show are based on pre-existing theoretical models. The math actually works out for a lot of stuff. They're actually trying teleportation now, which is just scary. All these things that you can do once you start adding additional dimensions, they're important because God stopped creating at day 6. He was done. He didn't create anything else after that. There are quite a few verses in the Bible. I didn't pull them. I'm not sure why. I finished this thing at 2:45 last night, so I ran out of time. But because God stopped creating, I believe when he does miracles, when he changes things in our life, he's using pre-existing physical constructs to do that. He does weird things like fold space and fold time. He has the ability to do this because he lives in a world that understands maybe 11 dimensions. I don't know. That's what string theory predicts. Maybe there's more. Maybe there's less. I'm sure there's more than 3. But this is why there's a concept out there that people believe God winded up the universe and then just let it go and doesn't touch it anymore. And it's no wonder because, in a sense, he kind of did. He created this thing. He's like, okay, now go. I'm not gonna change it anymore. I built it the way it is, and we're done. But that doesn't mean he's still not influencing it. It just means he changed his role. He stopped creating and started being a part of it. And we have examples of teleportation and folding space in the Bible. Jesus jumped across lakes. He moved boats instantly to shore when Peter walked on water. Philip, after baptizing the eunuch, jumped 30 miles in a single second. And things like that are weird. They don't make sense to us. But they make sense to God. And it's just because we lack perspective. We're stuck in our 3 + 1 dimensional construct. So anyways, back to the topic. So God creates space-time. Whether it's 3 + 1 dimensions or 11, doesn't matter too much after this point. So you can unload that out of your head. What's important is that God is not confined to any of these dimensions. He exists outside of the entire model, outside of the construct. It's his project, but it's not his home. To him, space and time do not have the same meaning as they do to us. To us, they are reality. To him, they are tools just to measure our existence. But they aren't his existence. This is something that isn't taught to us, and we don't like to think about it. It gives us headaches, which I apologize for in advance. But God exists outside of space and outside of time, and the implications of this are astounding. So we're going to talk about omnipresence and omniscience for a second. I like this. It's funny to me. God's omnipresence is sort of like, we can watch an ant farm. So it's like watching an ant farm. You can see from one end of the colony all the way to the other. If you had enough fingers, you could touch every single part of the colony, every single ant. And that's because, for all intents and purposes of this, they're living in a 2-dimensional world and we live in a 3-dimensional world. So we live outside of their universe, so to speak. And because of that, we can touch any aspect of theirs. We can see it. If we had the ability to talk to them, we could talk to one ant on one side of the colony and tell them what's going on the other side. And they'd look to us like, wow, this is amazing. Yeah, this guy's got powers. Jeremiah says, am I a God at hand, saith the Lord, and not a God far off? Has any secret of himself in secret places I cannot see him, saith the Lord? Do I not fill heaven and earth, saith the Lord? We have a lot of verses in the Bible that are all about God is everywhere and God is so big. And I think the reason for that is, it's not so much that God is so big, it's that that's the best concept we can come up with to explain how he can touch everything. If he can, be here with us and still be in China, he's got to be huge. But then I think we're still limiting him to kind of our construct of space and time. But will God indeed dwell in the earth? Behold the heavens and the heaven of heavens, which that one always confuses me. What is a heaven of heavens? Cannot contain thee. How much less this house that I have builded? So God can't be constrained by anything that we built, anything we can come up with. God be not far from every one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. So God is right beside us all the time, and without him, we wouldn't even exist. And things like this, like I said, they're hard for us to get. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding good and evil. All right, this one's working. So we're going to extend this concept of this to the concept of time. And then we start having problems because there isn't a really good metaphor that I found. This video I found posted of a guy who took a picture of himself every day for 8 years, which is quite the dedicated project. I don't think I could do that. So this is kind of how we see time, but sped up. This is 1 picture per day. You remember what he used to look like, and you know what he looks like now, but you don't know what he's going to look like. You don't know if he's going to look older, if he's going to wear glasses, if he's going to have short hair, long hair, a beard, what. I do. I know that he goes through a phase where he shaves his head a couple times, and he doesn't wear glasses so much. And then he grows a beard and a mustache, and he lets his hair grow out. Now, why do I know this? 1, because I've seen the video before, so I'm kind of cheating. We'll just skip ahead. But this is kind of how God sees time. He's aware that for us, the first pictures, way up there in that corner, is earlier in our time span. And the last picture, way down there, is later. But to him, time has as little meaning as space. He knows the first guy just as well as he knows the last guy. And he knows them at the same time, which is a bad word to use. But in the same instance, he knows every single one of these people. To God, there is only now. There is no future. There is no past. The only time he uses those terms is when speaking to us to help us understand. That's why time is so messed up in the Bible. But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing. One day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is on one day. What does that mean? It doesn't make any sense at all. At least not to us who are stuck within time. No wonder prophecy is so hard to read. Can you imagine trying to explain to a human before the discovery of quantum theory, relativity, electricity, that you view the universe in 11 dimensions? And try to get them write it down on a piece of papyrus. Like, the task is just daunting. It's as bad as me trying to explain to a 5-year-old why God wasn't born. So I hope you're starting to understand just how alien of an existence God is from us. We have more support in these verses about the immutability of God. I'm the Alpha and the Omega, says the Lord, who is and who was, who is to come. But you remain the same and your years will never end. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. For us, that makes no sense. We live through time. Things change us constantly. We're not the same person yesterday as we were today. I'm not the same person 5 minutes ago as I am now. But God never changes, because to him, time is not a factor. He is the same, literally, the same being when we were born, when Jesus was born, when Adam was created, as he is when the world will end. To him, it's not an incredibly long time as it is for us. We see that and go, wow, 6, 7, whatever the current number is, 5,000 years, or 1,000,000 years for those who believe that. To him, it's an instant. It's not even an instant, because that's still implying time. We lack the terminology to explain what he lives in. But this kind of might lend a clue to an age-old quandary. How do you know someone is going to heaven? I'm not going to say I have the answer. This is a thought experiment. If you reject God your entire life and accept him on your deathbed, will you be accepted? And what if you follow him all your life and in a fit of anger reject your Creator right before you die? In Catholicism, everything is predicated on a sequence of events. That is why suicide is an unforgivable sin, because your last act was one of murder. This is also why last rites are so important to them. they view the world very much the way we view the world. And it's no wonder, because we're used to sequences of events. But I think this is missing the fundamental aspect of God, that he doesn't perceive time the way we do. Why would he limit himself to a single action, whether it be our first or our last in our life? I think God probably takes our entire life into existence and compresses it down to a single fundamental character. The same way he constantly tries to express himself, God is love. This is the primary attribute of God. That is who he is. It doesn't matter if it was way back when he created the world or now. He has never changed. That is his fundamental character. And I think we all have kind of a fundamental character. And on a long enough timeline, we will always make the same decision for the entirety of our life. And we may, change our minds on instances or whatever, but over the course of our life, our purpose here is to make a decision. And it doesn't mean that our last decision will be the decision. Our entire life is the decision. Well, this also rolls into another thing. Have you ever wondered how God has the time to listen to all your prayers? And everybody else's? There's 7 billion people in the world. I think we just hit that benchmark. Which means at any given time, there's about 2 billion people awake. And God has a relationship with every single one of them, whether they realize it or not. That's mind-boggling. 2 billion friends at once. And those are just the ones who are awake. That's assuming he's not listening in on your dreams, which he probably is. So how does he have time when you pray to listen to your prayer, choose a path, and answer your prayer, all in keeping with his grand scheme of the will of creation? The God we believe in and serve is a God of relationships. And so we have to believe that he maintains those relationships. But how does he do that? It's the same answer as all the others, and I'm hoping you're seeing the pattern here. Every time you take even 5 seconds to talk to God, he has an eternity to mull over what you're saying, to think about it, to see what's going to happen in the future in your life, what's happened in the past, what's going to happen in everybody else's future, the choices they may make, and deliver an answer to you. Plain and simply, he cheats compared to us. We can't do these things. It's kind of not fair, but he's God, so suck it up. But the amount of information he must process during eternity is mind-boggling. To track every single atom, every single particle, every human, every thought you've ever had, on purpose or not, and fit that all into a plan to say, this is what happened at the beginning, and this is what has to happen at the end, and stepping outside that entire thing and watching the process. It's mind-boggling to me. So, what is it like to be God? God pre-exists space and time. He's the first cause. He exists outside of space-time. This is why he has things like omniscience, omnipresence, the ability to judge, to listen to prayer, and maintain relationships. So, what would it be like to be Jesus? You can see everything. You have the ability to have relationships with everyone who ever existed and will ever exist. You know everything. You were there at the birth of creation. You even participated. You understand 11th dimensional mechanics and can manipulate space and time to your will. This is what I think of when I think of God. And then this happened. And the Word was made flesh. And in an instant, he gave it all up. This isn't God setting a bush on fire or sending an angel. He decided to step into the river that is time. And he was instantly swept away in it. He chose to become constrained by space-time for 33 years. Now, that's not eternity. That's forever to someone who's God. I'm hoping you're getting what this means. He chose to give up everything that was himself almost, except for his fundamental character. So, let's go through the list. He gave up omniscience. No one knows about the day or the hour, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, Jesus. This is why Jesus didn't know when the end of the world was going to end, or the world was going to end. He lost his perspective. He no longer existed out of space-time. As soon as he became a baby, that was it. It was like being blindfolded for him. And we got the most famous verse among children who have to pick their own memory verse. Does anyone remember what the context of this is? When Lazarus died, yeah. So Jesus is upset because he could not be by his friend as he died. That must have been so hard for him. He's used to being with everyone all the time. And one of his good friends died and he could not be there. Now, I think he made a choice not to be there in order to show something else, but still, that must have been heart-wrenching. Omnipotence. So they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying. Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you listened to me, for I know that you always listen to me. And because of the multitude that stands around, I say this, that they may believe that you have sent me. And then he raised Lazarus. He did not do this on his own. He asked God for the power to do this. Every time he did a miracle, it was not from himself. He laid aside his ability to change space and time to affect the outcome of the universe. John 5. Jesus therefore answered them, Most assuredly I tell you that the Son can do nothing of himself but what he sees the Father doing. For whatever things he does, these the Son also does likewise. For the Father has affection for the Son and shows him all things that he himself does. He will show you greater works than these that you may marvel. For as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, even so the Son also gives life to whom he desires. I believe that even though Jesus set aside his divinity, he could have picked it up at any time. He kept his relationship with God the Father intact 100%. Their purposes are so in line with each other, and they talked constantly. I don't know how many examples we have of Jesus praying in the Bible, and I'm sure that's only a small percentage of them. God the Father did everything Jesus asked, and vice versa. One of the reasons Jesus came here was to lead a perfect example for us. He had to give up his divine power in order to be an example for us. What kind of example would it be if he were constantly doing things we couldn't do? I propose that Jesus never did a single thing that we as humans could not do. There are times when he displayed supernatural powers, but I believe all these miracles were done through God the Father. And I believe all his insight was provided by the Holy Spirit. This is the same power we are granted. There are people in this church who have experienced miracles. And there are people in this church who have experienced insight from the Holy Spirit. I think most of us have at one point or another. These are not pie-in-the-sky promises. These are real. Yeah. For I have given you an example that you should also do as I have done to you. Most assuredly, I tell you, a servant is not greater than his Lord, neither is one who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. He's talking here about the washing of feet, but I think it lends to a larger example. To me, the most selfless thing Jesus ever did was consent to be human. To give up omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience, to lose that eternal perspective of our reality. To be severed from the relationship God has with every individual while he is here. It's like being unfriended on Facebook by 2 billion people. It's gotta suck. And to do all that while he was still God, and he could have picked it up at any instant. You think milk or sugar or drugs or alcohol are hard to kick? Try detoxing off of deity. Okay. For 33 years he was here, and he set aside everything that he was, just about. All the powers granted to him because of his existence as God. And he did it for us, knowing full well who we are and what we were capable of, the good and the bad, especially the bad. Not only those humans who were living at the time, but every human, past, present, and future, including me, including you. Before he came down, he knew all of us by name. For to this you are called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving you an example that you should follow his steps. Amen.
How could I ever say thank you when the whole of this life's not enough? Though I offer each breath back in worship, it never could